For centuries, vampires have viewed human folk to be weak and pathetic creatures. But if there was one thing they hated more than people, it was werewolves. Werewolves were always viewed as mindless, filthy beasts that have either been cursed or sent from the underworld. However, while both those supernatural creatures detest each other, they could not deny the idea of a monster sharing the best of their traits and powers, being an unstoppable force that could take over the land. And one such creature emerged from the darkness of a forgotten grave, now roaming freely in the woods of Redwater. But this creature wasn't part of Dracula's hybrid operation. This was a fiend that had been created before Vlad Tepes became a monster. The first vampire-werewolf hybrid, a ghost of the Vampire King's past. Meanwhile, on that dark, stormy afternoon, the Vampire Cop was on his knees still scrubbing away the blood on the wooden passage floor of his cabin. There were towels soaked with blood heaped up behind and next to him. The Redwater police force was in his home examining the crime scene. It was a clear home invasion. The two vampire hunters that waltzed into the station a week ago had tried to kill Fullion Hunt. However, to the RPF, the motive remained unknown, for the vampire huntress, now lying on the Vampire Cop's floor, had a bullet in her heart, while the other had escaped. For the first time, Fullion didn't have to explain himself. He didn't need to cover up anything or make excuses. This was a clear-cut case of self-defense, and yet he didn't feel that way. Fullion Hunt was a dashing young man. He never showed his 102 years of age, rather remained 34 years old when he was turned. A mere smile from him would make the women in the precinct fall head over heels with their blushing faces, but at that moment the way he looked scrubbing the floor broke Captain Mull's heart. He looked miserable in that passageway. His expression showed a man that carried burdens too heavy for his shoulders. It showed a broken human being that was on the verge of giving up. For so long, the inspectors of the RPF have grown to respect and admire Fullion Hunt, though they couldn't recognize him in that situation. The RPF put out a warrant for the tall vampire hunter, unaware that they would only later find his body with no face, courtesy of Dracula. Fullion continued scrubbing the floor as tears of frustration rolled down his face. When the towel slipped and his hand touched the blood, he stood up angrily, throwing the towel against the wall and walked away. He sobbed the way a child would after getting scolded. He just wanted it to end, something he'd made known to Captain Mulls. Fullion told her that he was ready to put a wooden stake through his own heart and rid himself from this world. What has he done wrong, he thought? What business do the ancient vampires and the fate of Redwater have with him? But now wasn't the time for the Vampire Cop to travel the dark road of self-pity. Captain Mulls comforted him, but not in a kind-hearted way. She was angry that he would even think like that. She reminded him how many people he saved, including her, in his vampire life. How many families that now live happily and safely together just because he took the time to take on their supernatural cases when no one else believed them. She knew that granting Fullion his leave during this time would be the greatest mistake she could ever make. The Vampire Cop, cooped up in his home alone with his self-loathing thoughts and suffering, was a recipe for disaster. Furthermore, Mulls also wanted him back at work to keep him safe. Fullion Hunt clearly had a bounty on his head, and while the RPF may not be familiar with supernatural creatures of Redwater, she would do everything in her power to keep him safe. There were 15 telephonic reports, 7 face-to-face witness statements, and 5 bodies that showed up in the woods since last night. They were innocent people petrified to their cores, hoping Fullion Hunt, the pale, dashing, pointy-eared and quite peculiar detective, would come to their rescue in their darkest hour of need. And so the Vampire Cop snapped out of the spell of self-pity. He readjusted his posture, wiped his tears, took a deep breath in and focused on the matter at hand. The RPF would help rebuild and repair the shattered windows and the broken door of his home. He never needed to worry about them finding the basement, not when it was concealed to perfection. No one would ever know a book in the cabinet blocking the entrance was actually a lock and key mechanism for the secret basement, courtesy of his locksmith experience. After a few hours when the rain continued, Fullion Hunt was at the Redwater police station, though he didn't go empty-handed. Hunters obtaining vampire powers was a scarier immediate threat than ancient vampires awakening. If whatever they took was easily available or sold at local markets and shady vendors, then the entire city of Redwater would inherit vampire abilities without the downsides of the curse. Therefore, he would need to visit the forensic department to analyze the blood sample of Laika, the vampire huntress. Maybe there was something in her blood that could pinpoint abnormalities for her powers. He walked downstairs of the station leading towards the lab. There was a woman sitting at the table and paperwork scattered all over with chemistry equations and analysis reports. She had blonde hair tied in a ponytail and black framed spectacles. Fullion knocked on the open laboratory door and entered, greeting Miss Bell. She blushed and adjusted her spectacles and told him to call her Michelle. But Fullion never liked addressing colleagues by their first name. He felt it disrespectful. Nevertheless, he handed her the blood sample and asked her to find anything out of the ordinary. She frowned for a bit, examining the sample in her hand until she asked, "Just how much further from the ordinary are we talking about here?" He said, "Anything that differs from human blood." Miss Bell was taken aback by that statement, but this was her job and Fullion Hunt was a detective. She told him it would take 15 to 20 minutes max and he was welcome to wait in her lab. So he did. Miss Bell carried forth a microscopic examination, just a few minutes for the basic look, smearing a drop on the slide, letting it air dry briefly and putting it under the lens. She then looked through her lens and said, strange. Fullion startled Miss Bell when he stood right next to her, yet she never even heard him moving across the lab. "What is?" he asked curiously. But she ignored his question to make sure before she answered. She then moved on to the Teichmann test. The slide was heated over a low flame for only a few seconds before crystals could be observed under the microscope. Miss Bell then said, "Yeah, thought as much. Polycythemia." Fullion Hunt shrugged and frowned, then said, Poly what now?" "Polycythemia," Miss Bell continued, "an abnormally high red blood cell count, denser than any natural sample I've seen. There's more oxygen carrying capacity, more fuel going to the muscles. See here," she pointed. "The sample looks thick, almost sludge-like, with cells stacked too close. Furthermore, there are abnormalities with the color and the viscosity. The blood is unnaturally dark, almost black-red, like arterial blood that never lets go of its oxygen. Though when I've done the Teichmann test, then I knew there was something strange. Instead of the expected clean rhombic heme crystals, the crystals formed too fast, too large and in an irregular fused lattice, like something foreign crystallized alongside the hematin. Blood shouldn't look like that." Fullion asked, "What would they have to take for that to happen?" "Well," she continued, "I also see a resinous precipitate." The vampire cop looked at her like a deer in headlights. "Forgive me," she said. "There's an oily metallic sheen separating outward highly toxically." Then she was about to bring the sample closer to Fullion for him to smell, but from a great distance away he said, "Smells like bitter almond and copper." "How the hell could you smell that from there?" she asked him, absolutely bewildered. "Good nose," he said. Miss Bell concluded her analysis by saying, "There's an agent in the blood that's thickening the blood to a toxic level, yet the blood isn't clotting. My guess is something this person drank." Fullion looked worried at first, then gave a vague smile. "Thank you, Miss Bell," he said. "You have done a fantastic job." As he walked upstairs back to the main section of the police station, he thought about the smell. Bitter almond leading towards a copper odor. Therefore, he needed to find out what potion shared the same odor. And besides witches, who else could conjure up something like that? He entered Captain Mole's office and she gave him the rundown of the reports. She handed him a pile of paperwork that had witness statements and the descriptions of the creature from last night. However, before Fullion could turn to those pages, he looked over his shoulder at the doors of the police station. He felt a presence. His attention was then pulled away by Captain Moles when she said, "Oh, and Fillion, you'll be working this case with a consultant." "A consultant?" Fillion said in confusion. "Captain, you know I work alone. Why would I need—" But the heavy boots interrupted his train of thought. He felt this aura suffocating him, as if the air he breathed was poisonous. The thunderstorm intensified, purely coincidental of course, but maybe the timing had purpose, like the weather knew this consultant would arrive. A tall buff man entered the police station wearing RPF uniform. The top section of his long gray hair from above the ears was pulled back and secured, while the bottom section behind the neck hung loose in a half-up, half-down ponytail. His skin pale and tight. He opened the door to Captain Mole's office with a smirk on his face. Fillion's eyes widened with anger and shock. He was irate when he said, "Captain, what have you done?" And the not-so-strange man saluting to the vampire cop replied, "Good evening, Detective Inspector Fillion Hunt. Inspector Flair Tabish, reporting for duty, sir." Fillion never turned to Captain Moles. He never needed to protest the decision because he knew what happened. Dracula used the hypnotic gaze again, convincing Moles to hire him as an inspector for the force. Folk may think Flair Tabish is frightening for his physical battle skills or his power as a vampire older than 500 years. And they would be correct, but his intellect, as mentioned by Isadora the eldest crone, was absolutely terrifying. Instead, the vampire cop pulled out his pistol and pressed the front end onto Dracula's forehead. Moles jumped up from her seat, trying to defuse the situation, but Dracula waved his hand at her to show it was okay. Fillion said, "Why don't I put a bullet in your head and show everyone in the station what you really are?" Flair Tabish's arrogant smirk never left his pale face. If anything, he grabbed the front end of the pistol while Fillion aimed it, slowly lowered it, and pressed it against his own chest and said, "Oh, you could fire a shot right here, straight through my heart, and show everyone that you are just the monster that I am." Moles got between them, diffusing the situation. She wanted to know what was really going on, but Fillion brushed her off in annoyance. He told her how disappointed he was in her. A harsh statement, uncalled for and out of Fillion's character, but he was frustrated. He stormed out the police station, angrily folding the paperwork into his coat pocket. Flair Tabish gave a charming smile and winked at Captain Moles, then left the station following Fillion Hunt. He pestered him for a while until Fillion grabbed him by his collar and slammed him against the cold brick wall of the alleyway. "Why don't you just kill me?" Fillion asked. "If you're so scared of the crones getting my heart, why don't you just kill me and be done with this altogether? I hate you. I hate everything about you. I hate looking at your face. I hate the sound of your voice. I hate you." Though Dracula never fought back or answered. Truth be told, he never knew how to answer that. Flair Tabish was indeed a monster of the foulest kind. His crimes throughout his long vampire life have been so nightmarish that ending someone like Fillion Hunt would be the easiest thing he could do. Though recently he felt strange about the whole situation. He felt like he needed to protect Fillion Hunt for reasons he could not yet fathom. Reasons that only started showing up once he got away from the Gothic castle in Cascada. "I've received word of a werewolf creature with wings causing havoc in Redwater. Creatures like that, as we both know, are hybrids, which shouldn't exist since you killed them all. It isn't one of mine, and I'm the only one who knows how to create them. If this involves ancient vampire blood or hybrids, I'm just as invested in this case as you are. I feel its power weighing down on me. This isn't something you nor I can face alone. So if you want to bicker like a married couple, be my guest, or we could find this monstrosity and kill it." Once again, the vampire cop saw that look in Dracula's eyes. The look of a man speaking the truth and genuinely wanting to help. He thought about Anne-Marie giving him Dracula's journal. He thought about the first entry and how different of a man Flair Tabish was. Is that what haunted Fullion Hunt? Maybe that was the reason as to why he couldn't kill the Vampire King. How easy it would be to fight and end the monstrous evil Dracula with no remorse afterwards. But could Fullion, with a clear conscience, kill Vlad Tepes, the man trapped within the monster? Maybe it was fear. Fear knowing that if Dracula existed no more, they would never be able to defeat the ancient vampires looming over Redwater. Nevertheless, this investigation was more important. 5 people have died already, and the Vampire Cop would not let another victim be added to that list. However, Dracula showed no interest in saving human folk. When Fullion used his coat as cover to read the witness reports to prevent rain from getting them, Vlad Tepes took a sneak peek and saw the location the creature was last seen at. He traveled in a wisp of crimson smoke, soaring through tight alley corners and dark passages, making his way to the woods. Fullion, on the other hand, cared what people had to say. He cared about how they felt and how they perceived traumatizing events, so he could relate to their grievances and fears. While he may be the most skilled detective, accompanied by immense strength, speed, and heightened vampire senses, Fullion Hunt, much like the human folk in Redwater, was always terrified. The reports were divided. Some reported a werewolf creature while others mentioned seeing a vampire monster, although the descriptions remained the same. They said it was 9 feet tall, with dirty wet fur barely covering its monstrous, muscular body. The creature had gnarly fangs, large bat-like wings, and pointy ears that were almost as long as its head. Its claws were like meat hooks, razor sharp, they said, that it cut down a tree in the woods with one clean swipe. Folk in Redwater have accustomed themselves to vampire sightings, especially catching them feeding on victims in the woods. They slouch over their victims and drink their blood from the neck. However, this creature was more relentless and rabbit-like. The victims it killed were all torn in half, then held in the air over the creature's tilted head, with their blood dripping into its mouth. But the next part sent chills down Fullion's spine. While unable to get close to the creature, folk reported getting a strange odor from the area it was seen in, a strong, bitter, almond, copper-like stench that stung their noses. The Vampire Cop slowly folded the reports and kept it into his pocket. Bitter almond and copper-like stench, the same odor from the blood sample Miss Bell told him about. As Fullion made his way towards the woods, he bumped into an old man on the side of the village road. The man fell to the ground from the impact, groaning in pain. Fullion Hunt felt a sharp prick on his arm, between the bicep and the forearm, but quickly rushed to help the old man. "Please forgive me. I was distracted by my thoughts and I didn't see you there." Fullion then helped him to his feet and the man forgave him kindly. 15 minutes later, the Vampire Cop reached the reported location in the woods. Dracula was there, crouching and gently running his fingertips onto the dampened soil. He was examining the creature's footprints. Without looking, he told Fullion, "This fiend is quite large and heavy. Going by the length and width of its footprint, I'd say it's about 9 feet tall." Dracula looked different in that moment. He was focused and awfully serious, but not in a cool and calm way, rather furious. His red eyes were smoldering like molten lava, and his fangs were visible even in the darkness. He brought his fingertips, now soaked with the creature's blood, either from a scratch wound from a branch, to his nose. He growled in bewilderment. Fullion, shining the flashlight on the footprint, then at Dracula, had said, "Bitter almond and copper-like scent." The blood sample from the vampire huntress had the same smell. There was only one person who had that scented blood. Her Grace, Miss Rosendale. "Are you saying the hybrid is the Duchess?" Dracula looked up at Fullion angrily. His face was a scary sight to behold, and in a deeper, gravelly voice he said, "Of course not. She's dead. I buried her myself and only I know where. I don't know how this is possible." Fullion glanced at the footprints yet again. He took a moment, frowning, then his eyes widened with realization. Those footprints were left for them to find. They were freshly made as rain hadn't filled them up with water yet. It was too late for them to realize it was a trap. The Vampire Cop and the Vampire King, despite their heightened senses, had no idea the vampire-werewolf hybrid was creeping up behind them. The creature never attacked them. It wanted them to see its monstrous face. It wanted them to hear the sound of the chain shackled to his wrist, dragging on the ground. It wanted them to feel its power, for this monster was no coward, nor did it feel like it needed to catch them blindsided. Fillion turned around and slowly backed away. He had fought hybrids before, but never something of this magnitude. To him, this monster reminded him of Mordrog the Hellhound. Forget how large the creature was. Its face alone was more frightening than anything the Vampire Cop has seen in his long life. The fiend's eyes were large and yellow like a demon. Dracula, on the other hand, could not believe his eyes. Unlike Fillion Hunt, this wasn't the first time the Vampire King has seen this monstrosity. With both him and Fillion backing up at the same time, the creature walked slowly towards them. Dracula could only mutter a single word, a name, Veliketh. And to Fillion's horror, the hybrid had a voice.
"Oh, I'm glad you remember me, Fled Tepish, or shall I call you Dracula?"
Veliketh saw Dracula's red eyes and sharp fangs. He saw the razor claws at the ready and continued.
Never would I have expected you to become the monster you despised."
Every step taken by Veliketh, Dracula and the Vampire Cop backed up. Fillion whispered to Dracula, "How do you know this abomination?" But the Vampire King never answered. He was too stunned to speak. Fled Tepish, as a human many centuries ago, was petrified when he faced Veliketh. And now, with all his strength, speed, and power from being the Vampire King, that fear never left.
"Answer the man, Fled Tepish. Tell him how you in that hole burned me alive. And when that didn't work, you tried every trick in the book to bury me in the ground. Tell him how the Duchess's failed experiment almost killed her."
Dracula turned to Fillion and whispered, "Don't go for the heart, it doesn't have one. Target the brain. Whatever differences you have with me, put it aside. Fight with me, not against me, or we will not walk away from this battle." Fillion Hunt was taken aback. He feared Dracula. The Vampire King haunted his nightmares for decades, but Fled Tepish standing next to him resembled Fillion uncannily. Both of them were just two vampires with immense skill and power, fearful at the monster they were facing. For the first time ever, the Vampire Cop and the Vampire King were equals. Veliketh, with his large wings moving awkwardly like twitchers and two long silver chains swinging viciously round his wrists, let out an ominous werewolf roar. Before lightning could brighten the thunderous night sky, Fillion and Dracula changed into black and crimson smoke respectively, intertwining with each other, and dashed towards the hybrid. How quickly the night changed. If Fillion and Dracula thought they had the speed advantage, they would be mistaken. The hybrids have given the Vampire Cop trouble before with their lightning speed and agility, but Veliketh was different and Dracula knew that. He knew they weren't just fighting a creature. They were fighting a beast that shed blood with the Duchess he once served. He struck first. Dracula used a barrage of claw swipes, vicious attacks that would tear apart anyone, and yet Veliketh dodged them all. But Fillion followed through with his own attacks almost immediately. All three of them looked like blurs, vibrating and glitching with how quick they moved in the dark woods of Redwater. The hybrid dashed backwards, then swung one of two silver chains at Dracula. It wrapped around his neck, locking him in place. Then Veliketh roared and flung the Vampire King away. Dracula's fall through the night was broken by a few trees that had now snapped in half. Fillion was alone with this monstrosity. He switched up attacks, going high then low. He managed to wound the hybrid, though barely. The claw swipes weren't deep or powerful enough. Veliketh dashed towards Fillion, much quicker than he was at the beginning of the fight, and lifted the Vampire Cop in the air with one arm. Fillion tried kicking away to break free, but the grip the hybrid had been crushing his trachea. He tried to squeeze his fingers into the monster's grip to no avail. Valaketh retracted his hand as if a cannon reloaded, and just before he could dart his furry fist through the vampire cop's chest, Dracula charged at a great speed behind Valaketh, pushing the hybrid away with a shoulder dash. Valaketh dove forward, tumbling and rolling on the ground. Perhaps the hybrid never expected Dracula to hold so much power. He suffered with blood contamination, he was aging, and his body at times would fail him from the poison within. But Vlad Tepes was the king of vampires for a reason. Fulian and Dracula had been in too many battles to know what would be coming next. Without hesitation and in unison like they read each other's minds, they ran towards Valaketh. The creature never regained his full stability at that point, which worked in their favor. Dracula and Fulian used their razor-sharp fingernails and viciously clawed at the monster's wings. It grunted and groaned in pain trying to stop them, but they moved around the beast with fluidity. If the fight had turned into an aerial battle, the hybrid would have killed them a long time ago. Almost effortlessly, Valaketh back-kicked Fulian, sending him soaring through the air. Dracula moved around the hybrid, punching and clawing the monster's legs. Valaketh was brought down to one knee but used the silver chains to his advantage. He swung them at Dracula but not wildly like an animal. They became whoops of iron links of precision, scraping away the flesh of the Vampire King, whereas some strikes were pushing Dracula away and bringing him to the ground. Valaketh saw a wisp of black smoke circling him just before Fulian emerged from it, leaping at him. The Vampire King caught his breath for a moment. This fight wasn't going anywhere. They were nowhere near in defeating Valaketh than they were at the beginning, even with destroying his wings. Therefore, Dracula looked for an opening, finding a way to restrain the beast. He dashed towards Valaketh directly in the monster's line of sight, hoping the hybrid would launch a chain attack once again. Luckily, it did, and finally that arrogant smirk returned to Dracula's face. His glowing red eyes showed confidence, not fear anymore, though he hoped Fulian would be able to read what he was trying to do. And he did. The vampire cop rolled on the ground, moving towards Valaketh's legs. The hybrid was distracted by Dracula. Fulian grabbed the silver chain from Valaketh's left arm and quickly wrapped it around the beast's legs, bringing him off balance. With the other silver chain around Valaketh's right wrist whipped at Dracula, Vlad Tepes caught the chain in mid-air and jumped behind the monster. Vlad Tepes used the silver chain to wrap around the hybrid's neck, essentially making the creature strangle itself. However, there was more to this attack than Valaketh had thought. Dracula faced his back to the monster, with the long silver chain traveling over his shoulder and grabbed in front. He yanked and pulled the chain like he was lifting a shipment of cargo by himself. The hybrid had been lifted in the air, not realizing that the chain had also been going over a thick branch of the tree. When Valaketh tried kicking away or jumping out of the trap, Fulian Hunt pulled the chain from his side, securing the creature's legs like a vice grip. Vlad Tepes, using all his might to keep the hybrid titan suspended in the air and suffocating it, had said, "You have been defeated before, you foul creature, and you have been defeated again." The chain had been crushing Valaketh's neck. He was stuck in Dracula's creative gallows, with Fulian Hunt pulling the other chain wrapped around the monster's legs. Dracula had asked many questions. How was Valaketh still alive? Why was Cecilia Rosenthal's blood still in his body? And what was he doing in Redwater? But Valaketh answered none of that. The creature was suffering and suffocating. He knew he was going to die, and he wouldn't waste his final breath revealing answers to the man he hated. Instead, the hybrid looked at Fulian Hunt and said,
"We don't need your heart anymore. One drop of elder blood is all that it takes."
The fear consumed Fulian's face. Involuntarily, his hand moved and cupped the spot of where he felt the sharp prick from earlier. That old man bumping into him wasn't a mistake. That old man, who Fulian at the time never knew was Beelzebub, the demon masquerading as a wizard working for the crones, had taken his blood. With tension on either side of the chains from Dracula's end and his own, Fulian asked Valicat. There was an old man that I bumped into earlier. He pricked my arm. Who is he? Did he send you? Fulian tugged on the chain harder this time, asking angrily, Who sent you? But Valicat turned his eyes to Dracula, even though he couldn't see him, and in his suffocating final moments he said,
Vlad Tepish, they told me about your daughter.
Vlad Tepish increased the tension of the chain. His eyes were now smoldering red, and his skin began crumpling like parchment. Fulian noticed this and said urgently, Dracula, don't listen to him.
I wish I was resurrected that time. I hear Marie was rather beautiful.
Dracula, don't listen to this foul creature. He's trying to get into your head. We need answers.
Of course, she would be beautiful. Francesca was really something else.
Shut the hell up. Stop talking. Vlad Tepish, if you're in there, please listen to me. Release the tension. We need answers.
Oh, if I was alive back then, I would have paid them a visit in that castle. Both of them on the same night.
Dracula, don't do it. Don't. No. It had been too late for Fulian to release the chain on his end. Dracula tugged and pulled his side of the chain with so much force that the iron links ripped out Valicat's head. It snatched off the neck, like meat tearing off the bone, and the night fell silent again. This had been a few weeks since I've written. Work has been busy in the castle, though I am happy to write that my baby Marie has received the treatment for her sickness. The doctors tell me she's going to be okay. I had also earned enough to buy my wife a new dress, something that I could have done a long time ago if fate had been kinder to me. Francesca likes the new outfit, though not enough to fill the void of missing me dearly. The 2 days of rest and leisure pass by as fleeting moments. She's worried about me, that I know, but when the castle is safe, Duchess Rosenthal said they could move in. During the course of these few weeks, I've come to know Madame Rosenthal is a vampire, a being that feeds on the blood of humans and or animals. How she became such a creature is a sensitive topic, for her eyes tell me a story filled with great tragedy. Respectfully, I will not ask. If Madame wishes to tell me, then only shall I know for sure. Though I suspect Nasdaq, a name I found written on a piece of parchment in the conservatory drawer when cleaning, was a man she loved dearly. Maybe he bestowed this curse of vampirism upon her. Although I can corroborate, she does not harm innocent folk. Hunters that have committed heinous crimes, monsters that are too evil to roam the woods at night, and creatures most peculiar and foul have been slain by my hand and delivered to her when the sun sets. Not once have I feared for my safety from Madame, nor have I felt like a servant. She has been gracious enough to show me around the castle. I was impressed by her library, containing books from old and new age that whispered dark ancient history if one cared to listen. The resources and the knowledge possessed by the Duchess could change the world as we know it. Though in the nights I've stayed up guarding the castle, I cannot help but wonder why Madame Rosenthal would need a bodyguard. She's stronger and faster than me by a landslide, and is more than capable enough of defending herself. Though, last night was the first time that I understood why Madame cannot do this alone. She has been kind enough to educate me about the monsters that live in Redwater. Water hags, sirens, ghouls, witches, just to name a few. However, there was another which served more purpose. A werewolf. The substance of it as best as I can put down. A werewolf is a man who takes the shape and hunger of a wolf by one of several means. Some are born to it, marked from the cradle the seventh son, or a child conceived under ill auspices. Others acquire the curse of lycanthropy, a pact, a bite, an ointment made of foul herbs and ritualistic fat rubbed into the skin. In some tellings, a wolf pelt is enough, wrapped around the waist and removed to return to a man's shape. I have known men with such features and thought nothing of it. I do not know what to think of it now, only that I shall be aware of them in the presence of a full moon. Though I wondered why Madame Rosendahl had taken interest in such foul creatures, till she showed me a secret dungeon in the castle. My hesitance to enter came not from the coldness of the stairs leading to, or the space surrounding the dungeon, rather what had been inside. I heard growls deeper than any I could have imagined. I heard the sound of chains rattling and the gnawing of gnarly teeth. Madame Rosendahl said my face had become paler than hers in that moment. She smiled and giggled, her usual cheerful, pleasant self, as if that monster in the dungeon posed no threat to her. When she opened the door, I saw a creature, though not restrained. It stood more than 8 feet tall with wolf fur, though its ears were pointy and its face shaped like a bat. Without realizing, I slowly began backing up, till Madame Rosendahl held my hand and comforted me with her words. I thought it was a cruel trick, a game the village folk had talked about. I thought Madame was going to feed me to the monstrosity in front of my eyes. Then the creature spoke to the Duchess.
Miss Rosendahl, is this the man you were talking about?
Yes, Valiketh, she said. This is Vlad Tepish, as she smiled at me. My body showed fear of the monster, but not my eyes. Valiketh appeared friendly despite his monstrous appearance, though I wouldn't have let a scratch come to Madame. Then shockingly, the creature grabbed a piece of chalk and began writing on the blackboard. He wrote down peculiar symbols to what Madame Rosendahl said was chemistry. Her Grace and Valiketh conversed about the dosage of her blood being too little, and that his werewolf and vampire powers were cancelling each other out. Madame Rosendahl also mentioned that any more of her blood would create instability in the hybrid formation. They spoke for a long while, but I could not help but find the scent in the dungeon rather fascinating. I could smell bitter almond and copper, a unique blend and rather stinging to my nostrils. Later that night, I had come to know that scent belonged to Madame Rosendahl's blood. Elder blood, she said. Though her curse giver remains a mystery to me, I have been told elder blood flows through her veins. Because of this, every being in the underworld has been sent to kill her. When turned by the vampire elder directly, his blood is shared among his victims. Madame said to me that her blood could not only resurrect ancient vampires who were beyond evil, but also serve as a weapon to defeat them. She said a name to me regarding the ancient vampires, Lamashtu. Though our conversation came to a halt when folk knocked on the castle doors. I'm eager to learn about the ancient vampires and the curious vampire werewolf creature in the dungeon. He seems nice, rather friendly and highly intelligent. And his employers were at the castle doors, the Wizards of Three he called them. I haven't met them at the time, but Madame says they will provide her counsel and aid in the hybrid operation, which will be spoken about at the Werewolf-Vampire Council tomorrow. However, and I mean not to be rude, but since they've entered the castle, there is a strange sulfur smell that lingers on them. Though tonight, I shall tire with a heavy heart and a restless, troubled mind. With so much on Madame's plate at the moment, I do not have the courage to mention my doctor visit over the weekend. Her Grace says my voice is changing, though I have used the excuse of a common cold. I have not yet told her that I have been diagnosed with cancer. Dracula's castle, formerly belonging to Her Grace Miss Rosendahl, was a rather strange place. It held ancient knowledge, wealth, and resources that only existed in dreams. However, it also held the most amount of cursed energy outside of hell. To the woman in black, this has also been her home. Anne-Marie, much like her father Dracula through a vampiric blood bond, was evil, though she didn't see it that way. Anne-Marie was guilty of abducting dead people from their graves, as well as living folk from the woods, with the latter voluntarily accepting to be experimented on in exchange for wealth for their families. The hybrid operation that took place last season didn't exactly go as planned. Since they volunteered, Anne-Marie never felt like she did anything wrong, and since the others were dead, there was no harm done. But to Fillion Hunt, her crimes were enough to make him want her dead, for good this time. Furthermore, creating hybrids were meant to fight off the ancient vampires if they were ever resurrected. To her knowledge, Dracula had been following in Miss Rosendal's footsteps till that one dark night when Dracula had a change of heart to use the hybrid army and destroy Redwater. Anne-Marie, being the loyal servant that she was, never dared to question Dracula. She knew what she was doing the entire time, and her hands, much like flat tapishes, has blood that can never be washed off. However, since Fillion Hunt entered the picture, Anne-Marie has detached from the spell she was under. Maybe the Vampire Cop inspired others to do good just by being around them. But when Anne-Marie stole Dracula's journal a few nights ago, she realized that since both her and Dracula have been away from the castle, he looked and behaved more like his younger self. He became Flat Tepish again, the man who valiantly served the Duchess. Which meant there was something in that castle, something of great evil controlling those who lived in it. She snooped around the study, knowing that was the only room Flat Tepish did research in. Maybe someone from outside the castle has been bringing in cursed objects. She opened drawers, toppled over books from the library, searching high and low, and found nothing. Then a voice came from the door. "What you doing, Marie?" Anne-Marie was startled. She never heard Mercer approaching. The vampire mercenary stood shirtless, leaning against the doorframe, his long black hair tied in a ponytail, but the mark of the arrow penetrating his forehead from a few nights ago still remained. "How are you feeling, Mercer?" she asked. He ignored her question and repeated his own. "What you doing, Marie?" Anne-Marie wanted to answer but hesitated. Mercer was a complicated vampire, and she never knew if she could fully trust him. He was evil even outside the castle, so maybe the curse that lurked in the hallways never had been noticed by him. Nevertheless, he was Dracula's right-hand man, and while despicably evil to his core, she knew he would help her find the one thing poisoning their king. However, before she spoke, Anne-Marie heard strange noises outside the castle, like something or someone scratching the stone walls. It sounded slow and rhythmic, though she never imagined it. Mercer heard the same. Probably just insects, they thought. Then the woman in black went on to explain her purpose for snooping around. She spoke about the change in Flat Tepish and herself, and how she suspected there was a curse roaming the hallways in the castle. Mercer entered the study entirely this time. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a necklace. Then he dangled it around his large hand and said, "You mean something like this?" Anne-Marie stood there like every flashback struck her mind. "The necklace!" she exclaimed. Flat Tepish wore that necklace when he massacred her village all those years ago. He wore that necklace when he had a change of heart in the hybrid operation. He wore that necklace when he slaughtered innocent folk in the castle. "Mercer, how did you find it?" she asked. "How did you know?" But then, three voices in unison echoed through the hallway. We were the ones that told him." The Wizards of Three emerged from the doorway, walking then standing behind Mercer, while masquerading as three old men with long pointy beards and silk robes. They had evil smiles on their faces. Anne-Marie backed up slowly. "I do not understand," she said, staring at Mercer in sheer disbelief. Then the Wizards of Three told her,
"Would you like to see what we really are?"
The stench swarmed the study as smoke lingered around them. They showed their true nature. Three frightening large demons darker than the stormy night were now standing behind Mercer. Their eyes were large, round, and white, their teeth long like needles and their fingernails curling and curving. Mercer said to Marie, "You had to ruin it, didn't you? You just had to keep him away from the castle. We were so close in finally killing him." Anne-Marie's eyes turned red. Her fangs were long and sharp when she said, "He took you in as a son." Mercer scoffed. "Please, he only liked me when he wore this necklace." And when he didn't, he was disgusted to even look at me. Do you know how much it took to gain his trust? How long it took to infiltrate his vampire kingdom? Anne-Marie felt sick to her stomach to even look at Mercer. She was so angry that she ignored the persistent scratching noises outside the castle walls. She looked at the Wizards of Three in their demon form and said, Cornwell, Caleb, and Connolly, you three were the ones that poisoned the Duchess.
Please, we hate those names. We are Asmodeus, Belial, and Beelzebub. Oh, how we tried to kill her, but that bitch was too powerful. Elder Blood is immune to our dark spells, but not curses.
You killed her, Anne-Marie said in horror.
No, you pathetic child, she killed herself. She stuck a wooden stake through her own heart, knowing we will never be able to use it, though we got a few drops of her blood many centuries ago. We kept it for safekeeping. We resurrected Valleycat, and by now, Dracula and Fullion Hunt will be dead. And just to be sure, we took a few drops of Fullion's blood as well. We lied to the crones, telling them that his heart would be needed for the ritual. We sent them on a wild goose chase, when all we needed is a vial of elder blood, and now we have enough. The ancient vampires will be resurrected by our hand.
Though it was strange, Anne-Marie thought those scratching noises came from the Wizards of Three, but even they grew annoyed by it. The sound became louder and closer, like it was approaching the window of the room they were in. But that was impossible. The study was located at the highest floor in the castle. Nevertheless, she charged forward with rage. She fought with Mercer, the vampire mercenary who was stronger and faster than her. But Anne-Marie was no coward. She knew she would lose, and yet she would still fight to the death. Mercer dodged the attacks with both arms behind his back, smiling and laughing as he did so. However, the Wizards of Three had no time to play games. They snapped their fingers in unison, and Anne-Marie stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes could still move, but her entire body was frozen like a statue. The woman in black fell like a plank to the ground. They told Mercer to take her away. She was someone they could use as leverage against Dracula. But then, a scythe shattered the window, soaring through the air and darted towards Asmodeus. The blade of the scythe impaled the demon's shoulder, sending him flying against the wall, securing him in place. And through the broken window jumped in Ragnar Lifson, the White Wolf. The 8-foot-tall warrior knight turned werewolf stood in the study with his eyes glowing red and rain-soaked fur. Belial and Beelzebub backed away in fear, not only because it was Ragnar, but also the Reaper's scythe had struck their brother. They may be ancient demons, but dark magic cannot work against the scythe's wielder. It's why they avoided the Grim Reaper for so long. Like the cowards they were, they abandoned Asmodeus impaled by the scythe pinned against the wall, and escaped through the castle windows in clouds of amber smoke. Ragnar Lifson walked towards Asmodeus, while Mercer dashed across the room, flanking him. He charged at Ragnar with lightning speed, but the White Wolf, without even looking, reached his hand to the side and stopped Mercer dead in his tracks. He grabbed the vampire mercenary's throat, and only then did Ragnar look at him. "Vampire insect," he said as he threw Mercer out the window. In what seemed like an eternity, the vampire mercenary finally hit the ground. The White Wolf would have ripped out the vampire's spine and beat him with it, but time was of the essence. The spell on Anne-Marie had been lifted as she crawled away on the carpet in fear. Then she had realized the scratching noises outside the walls was Ragnar Lifson climbing up the castle. This was the first time she saw the monstrous White Wolf in the flesh. He looked scarier than the stories told about him. And as Ragnar Lifson walked menacingly towards the demon pinned against the wall, the finale of the Vampire Cop Book 2 grimly approaches.